In this video, we'll be talking about card scrapers, one of my favorite tools for guitar making. Maybe you've tried them before, maybe you didn't get good results or struggle with sharpening or just the scraper technique in general. But today, I'm happy to tell you that in this video, I'll be showing you my tools, methods, techniques, and more to help you get great results from your card scrapers every time. Hey, Tom Bills here from theartoflutherie.com. Today we'll be talking about card scrapers. Really amazing and simple tools that enable you to create smooth and beautiful wood surfaces in seconds. They leave a much smoother surface than sandpaper, and I find that they allow me to take off as much or as little wood as I need to and feel really confident about it, even in figured woods and wild grains and a lot of the things we run into in guitar making. But there is a catch. And that is that scrapers don't work as well as they could right out of the box. They do require a deeper understanding and a specific technique in order to get the best results from them in your work. So if you figure it out on your own through trial and error like I did, it can take years. But fortunately, you're here watching this video because today I'll be sharing with you the 6 essential techniques and concepts that helped me to improve the speed and quality of the work I produce with my scrapers for handcrafting my guitars or really doing any kind of woodworking. Before we dive in, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, the Luthier's Edge. The Luthier's Edge is an online luthier school and mentorship program where I've had the privilege of personally helping hundreds of guitar makers of all skill levels to shorten their learning curve and build better guitars. Click the link in the description to learn more about how the Luthier's Edge can help you get started building guitars or help you take your current guitar building skills to the next level. I've found that success with scrapers and pretty much all hand tools starts with a deeper understanding of how they actually work. And that was definitely true for me when I was first learning to use scrapers. My big mistake was that very early on, I was so busy focusing on my guitars and the task at hand that I never really stopped and took a good look at what was really happening to the edge of the scraper, like how it was actually cutting and what was really happening. When I finally did, though, stop and take a closer look, it was a game changer. And the truth is that most scrapers aren't really even scrapers at all. They're actually microplanes. Most people, including me before I realized this, think of the scraper as simply having a square edge, which it sometimes can have for specific applications, which we'll talk about soon. But most often, a tiny burr or hook is rolled or drawn out to form the cutting edge of the scraper blade. Even though I knew this on a surface level, it was a long time before I realized that that tiny, almost invisible burr edge is what transforms this simple tool from a scraper to a microplane. And it's the microplaning action of the burr that results in those ultra-thin shavings a scraper can produce. And if you look closely at the wood after creating those beautiful shavings, it's not hard to see that the wood surface looks almost identical to wood that was cut with a plane blade. That's because it was just a nearly microscopic one. Knowing which scraper to use for which application is another key aspect to getting the best results from your scrapers. The shape is the obvious part, so we won't spend much time on that part. You know, like if you need a round one, you can just use a rounded scraper and so on. But there is one element that I find very important when matching which scraper to use for which task. And that has to do with flexibility or rigidity of the blade, which most of the time is just a result of the thickness of the blade. So I want to give you a little background into the way that I kind of think about this. And to do that, I want to talk for a second about sanding blocks. And I know it sounds a little weird, but just bear with me because this is the way that I think about it and what helped simplify the concept and kind of makes it stick in my mind in a way that I can use it, and I'm hoping it'll do that for you too. So anyway, when I'm sanding, I do it really intentionally, and I might be sanding to get something level, to take down a high spot, or I might be finessing subtle curves that I need to be very graceful. But whatever I'm doing, I have a very specific goal and a vision in my mind. And with that clarity, I can choose the right sanding block for the job. For example, a hard block like this is needed to make something really flat and smooth. its rigidity is going to help me slice off the high spots and just leave a nice, uniform, flat surface. And in contrast, if I need to refine graceful, subtle curves, I'm going to use a soft sanding block like this, and its softness is perfect for finessing those curves and smoothing them in a way that I could never do with a hard block. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's get back to the scrapers, and hopefully you see why I took a minute to talk about that. So I apply the same process when I'm choosing the scrapers for which application, and I'm looking at that rigidity. So I'll use a thick scraper to help me slice off the high spots and create a nice even surface. And if I want to refine and sculpt flowing curves like those on an archtop guitar, I'll use a really flexible blade so that I can bend it to match those curves that I'm trying to create. So if you take this approach, you'll be able to match the right scraper to the right task and get much better results faster. Next, I'll show you my personal kit of scrapers that I like to use and that I've found to work really well for creating handmade guitars. I'll quickly go through each one and I'll explain why I like it so much, what I use it for, and why. Let's start with this little set that I have right here, which is probably the one that I use the most, more than any of the others, because they just seem to be the right size for guitar making. They have great flexibility, and the larger curved one is my go-to scraper for archtop guitars. And many of the smaller ones have special purposes as well, such as scraping glue and getting into tight places that require a more delicate touch. Okay, next up we have the Lie-Nielsen rectangular card scrapers. These are amazing when you're working on larger areas, and this thicker one right here is really nice and stiff, and it's perfect for helping to get a surface you're working on nice and flat and even. And they are made by Lie-Nielsen, so of course the steel is great. It holds an edge wonderfully, like all my Lie-Nielsen tools. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I'm a huge fan of all their tools. The thinner one is easier to bend, and it's good for sort of bending to hit like specific spots when you're leveling or making really subtle curves. But great scrapers overall for sure. Last but certainly not least, we have the Ultimate Scrapers from Stu Mack. These scrapers are very different from all the others that we've looked at so far. They're super thick, they don't flex at all, and they're more of a true scraper and have no burr edge. So they're quite different, but they have amazing rigidity, and they're just wonderful for anything that you need to get really flat, really even surfaces like headstocks. They're my go-to scrapers for scraping binding after it gets glued in place when I need that stiffness to make things very flat, clean, and even. And going back to our sanding block analogy from earlier, these Ultimate Scrapers are the hard sanding block of my scraper kit, if that makes sense, if you know what I mean, and you saw that part. When I need to take wood off fast and get it dead flat or very even, these are a wonderful choice. So you can see it's a pretty small and simple set of scrapers, but it does everything I need it to do for guitar making. I will put links to all these things in the description in case you want to check them out too. Okay, before we get into how to sharpen the card scrapers, let's take a quick look at the tools I like to use most for the sharpening process. Now, there are many different combinations of tools. There's even card scraper systems, which are really nice from companies like Veritas. This is just a real basic set of inexpensive tools that I've been using for many years, and they work great. But you might want to go for something a little nicer, but at least you'll get to see sort of my tool set here and see how I use them. So to do the initial cleaning up of the edge, I just use a fine mill file. Nothing fancy here, just a basic one from a hardware store. Basic medium sharpening stone. I don't remember exactly what grit this was or anything because it's really old, but I can tell you that about 1,000 to 1,200 grit is pretty good and seems to do a fine enough job to get a really nice edge. I know that because once in a while I'm in a hurry and I cheat and I just use some 1,000 or 1,200 grit dry sandpaper to do that part so that I don't have to mess with oil and stuff. When I'm touching the guitar, sometimes I don't want to stop and do that. Once you get the blade cleaned up, then you're going to need a burnisher. You can use any kind of burnisher you want. I happen to use this one, which is from Stu Mac, and it's just handy, and I've gotten comfortable with it, and I've been using it for so many years. I really like it. It's just got the little burnisher inside here on a set angle, which makes it really easy to just draw across that blade, which you'll see here soon. And the last thing is just a little bit of oil, and probably an actual sharpening type oil might be better than this, but this is what I always just grab because it happens to be sitting on my bench. It only takes a really little bit, but it does make a bit of a difference for both the, if you're using a stone, of course, and then definitely also when you're drawing up the burr with the burnisher. So we'll get into all that stuff in the next section, but just thought I'd show you the tool kit here first, so you kind of have an idea of what we're going to need to do the sharpening process. Now we're going to go through the steps of how I like to sharpen my card scrapers. Keep in mind, this is my method. This is what works for me. I mention that because I think it's important to look at things like this as a starting place for you. So you might find some tweaks and modifications or different tools that work better for you. So, don't put yourself into like a strict guideline of, this is the right way or the wrong way to do it. So look for your way. That's the key. I'm going to show you mine because I'm hoping it'll be helpful to you. One other quick thing to mention before we start is that I showed you in the previous parts of this video some different scrapers that I use. The regular card scrapers and the Stu Mac Ultimate Scraper. Now, the steps I'm going to show you are for sharpening card scrapers. The Ultimate Scraper is a completely different animal. It has no burr, and this is sharpened just using a grinding wheel. Very simple grinding wheel sharpening. So it's a different thing. So don't try to do what I'm going to show you to this one because it won't work right. But this gets me a really beautiful, sharp, great burr edge, and helps me cut through all the crazy flamed and figured and even softwoods that we run into for guitar making. All right, so I think we're ready to get started. Okay, step one is to clean up the edge of your scraper. So if you've been using it for a while, there's probably already an old burr on there that might be chipped or just not cutting well anymore. If it's a brand new scraper, then you still need to kind of go through this process to get everything cleaned up and get a really nice edge on it. The process is very simple. I like to use this vise. Maybe I'll turn it like this so you can see it better. You can use a bench vise, you can use whatever you need to. You can even, cut a slot in a piece of wood so you can hold this. But for me, I've got my regular, I don't know what this one's called actually, but it's the one I've been using for many years. And I have a little bit of cork lining in here, which just helps for a lot of different things. But it makes a really nice way to grab onto that scraper and hold it in place. And so I'm just gonna put it in here like this first, just to get the process started. And I'm going to use just a mill file that we talked about earlier. Now, there's different ways you can do this again. My way is kind of, I'm usually just focused on getting back to work and not losing my flow of my guitar making. So I just eyeball this, I just put it on top, and I just, get the feel for, hitting a 90-degree angle here is what we want. And I'm just going to move it back and forth like that. Always keep in mind too that your file really only cuts on a push stroke. So even though I'm not picking it up when I come back, I'm really just doing like a cut and then I'm sliding it back and a cut and sliding it back. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. And I'm okay with if this ends up being off as long as I hold it steady. That's really the most important thing for me. So if you want to be more precise, you can take a block of wood and, kind of maybe even something like this and cut a slot in it, so that this stands up out of that piece of wood at a perfect 90-degree angle and use it that way. A lot of guys do that. I just grab the file and go for it. Okay, once I have that, now I'm starting to get a few I can feel a burr coming out on the edge, but this is not a good kind of burr that you want to use for cutting. So the next step is to remove the burr off the edges. And to do that, I'm going to switch over to my stone. Just do the whole thing here really quickly. Quick drop of oil. And then I'm just gonna bring this in. And the key to this part really is to have your fingers spread out evenly along this edge so that you're doing an even amount of pressure. You can feel it when it's when the burr kind of surrenders and goes away. Then I just flip to the other side. And you can do ovals or figure eights or whatever. And sometimes if I'm in a big hurry, I just use sandpaper for this. But this is the proper way. And it does help to make a really nice polished edge. Okay, and then lastly, I'm gonna need to remove the scratches from the edge of the blade. And you can do this in a few different ways. Sometimes I do it the same way as before. It's probably my most common way to do it. You know, normally you're not thinking about this a lot when you're in the flow working, but sometimes I just go like this. I know some of the other sharpening gurus might not like this, but it's just fast. And like I said, you can do it another way too, and you can see this edge will start to get a nice little mirror shine to it, and it'll come up and it'll feel nice and smooth. So yeah, that's feeling out. No, wait, there's a little bit right there. So hold on, go back. So check it like that, you know, and you can go back and forth a few times if you need to. Where was that? Okay. That feels pretty good. Oh yeah, that feels good. Okay, just in case you're not as gung-ho as I am about sort of eyeballing all these different angles and things, I want to show you kind of the more traditional way, some people might say is the correct way to do both the filing and the polishing of this thin side edge right here. And it's really simple. It's just instead of doing it the way I did where the block is on top, you do it by taking a block of wood that has a 90-degree angle on it, and you just set this onto your, and there's other ways too, but this is the most common. You set this on and then you can bring it back and forth like this. You can even move it so it won't make a mark in your stone, you know, things like that. And you can go back and forth like that to polish it, and it'll hold that 90-degree angle edge for you. Maybe I should do it that way. It is nice, but sometimes I just, you know, you get stuck in your ways and you just do things the way you do them, and it works for me. So you know how I do it, you know another way to do it, and I'm sure there's many other things. So experiment, find out what works, and just have fun and go for it. So that does it for that part. And now we're ready to move on to the burnishing. I want to mention one other quick thing. When I'm doing a curved scraper, because I mean this is my most used scraper out of any one that I've shown you. I've used this one constantly, especially when I'm working on archtop guitars. But this one I do a little differently. If I'm using the stone, or when I'm using the stone, since it's in here, I'll show you this one first. But when I'm using the stone, I do it like this. So the stone goes in here, and I do the edge this way. And when I'm using the file, it's the same thing. I have the file on my bench or in the vise or whatever, and I'm doing the same thing as I'm cutting like this. So it's a little different for the curved one. Maybe this is what got me into the habit of just eyeballing these angles for this, but that's how I do it. And it's worked fine all this time. So I go through the same process there to remove that burr, and then of course the same process here as well, like this. Just like we did before, and then I do both edges. I'm not taking time to do this, the whole process of this right now, because you already saw it on the other one, but I just wanted you to have an idea of, you know, how to do a curved versus just how to do a straight rectangular scraper. So Okay, next we're gonna jump over to this other workbench over here, and this is typically where I begin the process of drawing out the burr, which is really simple. We're just going to take our burnisher. Now, if you're using a regular burnisher, maybe something kind of like a screwdriver type, burnisher, a screwdriver might actually work. I don't know if it was hardened enough, but a burnisher, you're gonna, at this point, you'd be taking it and going almost straight, so you're not really creating like an angle at this point. At least I don't like to. So I just bring it along straight like this. Maybe, I don't really count, but it could be 10, 20 times. I'm not pushing that hard. Just a good solid force on there, but nothing major. And what that's going to do is start rolling out that edge of metal. It's going to draw the burr out up there so that in the next step we can roll it over. And to do the rolling over and actually create our burr hook, we're going to go back to the vise over here. Just tighten this back in, and we are going to prepare to roll. We're going to use our burnisher again, and we're going to roll over that hook. Some people call it turning the hook, but we're just going to create that burr edge that we're going to use for getting the edge that we need to do the scraping, right? There's one quick thing I want to show you. So if you're using I'm using pretend this is a regular burnisher. I don't have one because I've always used this one. So at this point, if you got a regular burnisher, you can, begin moving back and forth like this, and you probably want to leave the edges. It's important to leave all the way so you don't end up with an edge that's not fully, that doesn't have a burr on it. And then you can begin to go to that sort of 5-degree angle. Some people go back and forth and then slowly work their way down to that angle. And of course, you do it on both sides. But, again, maybe 10, 20 times is about all you need with sort of a moderate type of pressure. So that would be the step if you're using just a regular type of burnisher. Now, for this type of burnisher, it has the angle built in, which is one of the things I love about it. But it also, when I go off the edge, it kind of catches, because one of the things I don't like about a regular burnisher is that when it slides off the edge, it always just feels weird and it kind of messes with me. So what I like to do is set my scraper just a little over here, like this, maybe not super high above. And then I'm gonna kind of lock this in. And what it does is it makes a little landing place for this to roll off the edge, which I really like. So then when I'm doing this, I'm gonna let it come off this end and sort of like drop onto itself here. And then when I come off this side, I let it drop here. So it just makes it feel nice to me. Now, you can add oil at this stage. I haven't really wiped this off that much, so there's a tiny bit of oil left over from when we had the sharpening stone. Not a big deal, so that works out fine. So that's about it. Now, another interesting quirk about this particular burnisher is that the angle is like this, is already preset, like I mentioned. So if I use it vertical like this, I'm getting the maximum angle. If I use it completely like this, because of the way that's set in there, I'm getting no angle. So somewhere right in the middle here is what seems to work for me, but you can alter that angle by moving this up and down, which is another handy thing. So about right here is about where I keep it. So I do one side, then I come back and do the other side. Not pushing hard. I find that doing it more times works better than pushing hard. And I can feel the burr on each side to see how I'm doing, how I've done as far as getting a good burr on each side. Boy, that feels good. Also, since we have the camera zoomed in here, let me show you what this would look like for a rounded scraper, which is pretty much the same. I don't have it quite high enough here, but I think you get the idea. I won't make you watch the whole process again, but it's the same kind of thing that I would do at that point as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You see how easy that was, and I hope that you see, or hope that you find that having the background that we talked about how this actually works and what's going on with that burr edge is helpful to have in your mind as you're working on sharpening that edge and creating that burr. But simple process, simple tool set required to do it, and really it only takes a couple minutes and you'll be back to work. Okay, now that we have a nice razor sharp burr on the cutting edge of our scrapers, we need to take a second and talk about the technique, because you need the nice sharp scraper, and that has to be combined with the correct technique, because good technique with a dull scraper or sharp scraper with a bad technique, neither of those are going to make you love using your scrapers and help you to get good results with them. So we would need both of those things working together. We've got the sharp edge, and now it's time to look at the technique. So the technique is really simple. Of course, based on the criteria we talked about earlier, I'm going to be using the thicker of my two Lie-Nielsen card scrapers, and we're going to work on this piece of flamed maple. This is big leaf maple, and it's got a decent flame in it. This is a piece of wood that, if you try to, from experience, I can tell you that even with a low angle block plane, if you try to plane this, it's chippy and it wants to tear stuff out. And a lot of times when I'm working on a guitar, I cannot risk any chance of something chipping or tearing out, because there's just no room for error a lot of times. So that's when things like card scrapers come in handy, and that's why I'm showing you this on a piece of flamed wood, because flamed wood is a lot different than planing just a nice flat sawn, super smooth piece of wood that your scraper can get huge curls off of and stuff, and that's exciting and fun if you're working on that. But for me, this is about guitar making mainly, so I need to make sure that my tools are going to work well in those specific applications. And the big challenge for me most of the time is end grains and flamed wood and different grain directions and things like that. And so this technique is sort of developed around that over the years, kind of just as I was working. So very simple though. So the main thing is to take the card scraper and don't just have a set angle in your mind. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put it down onto the wood at a perpendicular to the wood surface. The cutting angle is, like most of this cutting technique, is again kind of intuitive, and you got to learn how to feel it. So rather than say, okay, cut at a 45-degree angle, really what it is I want to show you kind of how to identify where that angle is, because it's going to change over time as you're working. So when I put this down, I've just done a fresh sharpening, and I'm going to go ahead and begin moving it. And as I'm moving it forward, I'm going to begin to lean it, and then all of a sudden it just grabbed right there. So when I'm coming forward, a little bit of tension there, but then right there, I'm not putting a lot of down pressure, but it just literally grabbed right there. Now I can go further, and then I can slide it again. So that's how, so there's an area here in the middle. I could go this way too. Right there is where it starts grabbing. It's not 45. I think it's going to be a little higher. But anyway, so if I let's cut real low, like that. So you can see there's just some dust. And if I cut straight up, there's some dust. And let's see what happens if I go down and I find that spot. I'm going to flex the blade just a little, and that's where I start getting some nice beautiful shavings. Now, in figured wood, you got to remember that the figure creates end grain, especially if it's really deep figure. So your shavings will be curled up like this, but they're not going to be as wispy and big, because actually it's going like regular grain, end grain, it's alternating, and that end grain is going to fall apart. So don't get discouraged. I mean, this is really what it looks like for me when I'm doing this flamed wood like this. These are very good shavings for this. It's going to be a little dustier than it would on just a flat sawn non-figured piece. So, but that's the technique for that. So lean it forward till you feel that, and then start, making your cuts like that. And you're going to end up with some nice, beautiful curls, even in this super figured wood that I couldn't plane without risking like chipping and doing major damage. Okay, so now we've got the angle technique right. Let's talk next about grain direction. I'm going to demonstrate just a little bit on this. This is a Sitka spruce arch top that I've kind of rough carved. There's still some work to do on this, but I thought it might be a good thing to show a little bit of how I'm approaching the different technique for grain direction. I'm just going to clamp this to the bench in a way that hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And now for this one, we're going to use one of my favorite scrapers, this little rounded, more flexible scraper. And I'm going to be using the more flexible side here as I work and I finesse these edges. And then what I typically do is then flip it over and use this flat side, and I can bend it the other way to get these other parts. Now, I know that the grains are sticking out the end. If I went this way, I'd be cutting directly into them. So I'm going to begin sweeping around the side like that. And this is very rough. I think probably most of the time I would sand this first, but if I don't want to, I don't have to. Because even in this soft spruce, you can still get a really nice curl out of it. And now I just switched to the other side without realizing it. I just automatically did it. And because I wanted to move up to this part and get a bigger curve, so I can bring it up here and then flex it. Instead of flexing the normal way, which would be like this, I'm going this way to make this kind of a curve, And then, so up here, I'm letting it flex this way, and as I move down, I'm bringing it back this way, because the curve is changing from that to this, if that makes sense. And this is my main tool for, subtly adjusting these arches. This is really one of the main reasons I love scrapers so much for guitar making. So I won't keep going on because I think you get the idea, but hopefully you can see that it went from rough, like the way it was left with my violin playing when I was carving it, all the way to this in just a matter of seconds. Sanding would have made a big mess. I would have had to get out a big sander and all kinds of stuff, but instead we were able to do it in just a couple seconds and have such fine control over how much I'm taking off and how I'm beginning to start the process of refining this arch and flowing that into the recurve. Okay, so hopefully that helps give you some parameters and a couple of guideposts between managing the angle that you're cutting and then paying attention to the grain direction and just sort of focusing, you want to focus on the feel and understanding what it feels like when you're getting a good cut, and your hands will just begin to automatically make the changes to the angle and bending it and switching it, and it all becomes very automatic. And it takes a little time to get to that point, but man, when you do, it's just a joy. It's so fun. It's like I'm watching I started slipping into the zone a little bit when I started doing that. It's just because it's my happy place where I go and I come up to the work piece and then I just I'm almost a spectator watching my hands do the work, and it's just a really cool experience. So I encourage you to spend the time, developing that as much as you can, just through experience, to get to that point with your scrapers, and you'll really love the results you get and you'll really enjoy your time working with them. Okay, I've got one bonus tip that I just had to include because it's something that I do all the time, and I think you'll find it really helpful. It's really simple. So once you've done a proper sharpening to create a really nice edge and gone through the steps that we talked about before in the previous sections, and then you start working, and as you work, the burr gets kind of worn out. It's not quite cutting as good. At that point, you can stop and do a complete new Re-Sharpening, which is totally fine. But a lot of times what I do, most of the time what I'll do, as many times as I can get away with it, is I'll skip the steps that required, like the stone or the sandpaper if you're using sandpaper, or the file, and I'll go straight to the burnisher. So what you can do is, you've done your great sharpening, you worked for a little while, the edge starts getting dull, and you can just jump straight over. I'll just come right over here to this workbench, and I'll grab my burnisher. You could use whatever kind of burnisher you use, and just go ahead and roll that edge back out. So you'll feel that burr, and this time you're just gonna sort of fold it down until it's smooth on the side, and you flip it over and do the other side as well. And then from there, you go straight back to your vise, and in your vise, you're gonna go ahead and take your burnisher and you're gonna roll that burr back out so that you're gonna create your cutting edge with your burr. And just do both sides that way. And a lot of times, just those two simple little steps will get you back to work, and the scraper will be cutting just about as good, and sometimes once in a while even better than it did from your original sharpening process in just a fraction of the time. And sometimes I can get away with that 2, 3, even 4 times before the edge is just too damaged and I have to go back and do a full sharpen. So anyway, that's the bonus tip. It works great for me. Give it a try. See how it goes for you too. So now you know my process, techniques, tools, and hopefully gain some insights and a deeper understanding of how the scraper works, how to use it, how to sharpen it, and all those things that I'm hoping will help you get better results from your scraper and learn to love to use it and enjoy it like I do. If you want even more super detailed information about scrapers, you can check out my free ultimate guide to scrapers over on my website, theartoflutherie.com. Also, the Luthier's Edge online guitar making school, the free guide to scrapers, everything else we mentioned in this video. I'm going to link all that stuff in the description for you in case you want to check it out. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel if you'd like to be notified when my next video goes live. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.